Hi everyone and welcome to my Yae Miko ears tutorial. In this video I will show you how I made my cosplay ears. First up, for the pattern I simply drew out the rough shape on how I saw it and then just held it up to my head and kind of figured out the dimensions and proportions as well as the angle at which they hang down. Because Yae Miko does have these lowered ears instead of the typical perky fox ears you see usually. After holding the paper next to my head and again figuring out the exact shapes, I took the paper, I folded it up again and traced it on a nicer piece of paper that wasn't full of scribbles yet. So the first thing I want to do when I'm starting on a new pair of ears or anything with fur really is comb out the fur. Fur tends to fly off in every direction if you start working with it, and if you comb it out with a dog brush or cat brush, you will gather around most of the flying furs, so you will have a cleaner workspace while working. Now, if you've never cut fur before, it is very important that you don't use scissors and cut through the hairs, because as it will look kind of like a shaved dog, actually. Instead, you can use a X-Acto knife or a cutter, as I'm using, and just kind of scratch off the layer that the fur is connected to. As you can see, the ends of my cutting are still very fluffy. So next up we go to dyeing. I've never seen pink and white fur before, so I had to custom dye the dip dye of the fur. So I took my white fur and I used Rit Dye More, the same dye that I'm also using for my Jire wig. Then I'm taking a leftover piece of the faux fur and just dipping it into the pink dye. Now, thanks to this little tester, I did realize that the pink is too pink for my wig. So I added a little bit of the yellow so that it's not this super bright pink, but more toned down like a salmon kind of color. Yeah. And then I mixed it up. It's like just a very little bit of yellow in the pink. And after making that, I started the dip dyeing. Now, before you want to dye fabric or fur or wig or whatever, always make it wet first. So you can just rinse it out in your sink in cold water, just that it's wet, because then the dye will stick better to your thing that you're dyeing. So to get a nice dip dye, I just, dipped it in the dye, as the name suggests. As you can see here, it's a nice little dye, and once I was happy with it, I rinsed it out on the cold water again, so that all the color that is not in the fur runs out of it. After that, I simply put it out to dry and took the pieces that will be completely dyed. Now, the upper part of her ears are not white pink, but pink, so I could just throw them into the dye bath. I also moved it in the dye, so I made sure that every part of the fur gets onto the dye. So, also a tip for your forbidden soup. Don't use any kitchen appliances that you will use later for eating. The dye for synthetic materials is toxic to eat. So whatever pot you are using and whatever spoon you are using to stir, you will no longer be able to use them for normal cooking. So once everything was dyed and I was happy with it, I put it outside in the sun to dry. Of course, you can also leave it inside to dry. It was just summer and very nice weather. Now, once it was completely dried off, I started brushing again. The dye and the whole procedure of getting it wet and stirring it in a pot kind of made the fur sticky and ugly, as you can see. So I took my dog hair brush and just brushed the fur in one direction and then in the other direction and then in the forward direction again, just so that it's really fluffy and nice again and that it doesn't feel, well, so that it doesn't. So now that everything is fluffy and nice again, we can start sewing the ears. Now I did sew them, I didn't glue them, simply because I like this more personally. So we put right on right side, we sew along, we flip it to test if we like the way the seams come along. Then we flip it back again and sew in a wire. First I didn't want to use a wire, but then I figured I want them to hold the shape very nicely and maybe be a little bit bendable. So I put in this wire and I sewed it into the seam allowance so that it would be on the corners of the ears always. For sewing it in, I simply used a normal forward stitch and made some back stitches along the way to make sure that it holds together. Now for the final step, I glued in some magnets into the ear, and I also glued in some magnets into the wig so that they are detachable. I used some Gotcha Bee styling gel for the spikes to give them a little bit shape and make sure that the fur stays in the direction it's supposed to be. And here you can see my finished ears. I hope this was helpful and I hope you have a nice day. Bye bye!